but whether it is actually useful and beneficial for learning, that is something that we must critically address with the technology. So without further ado, Deb, the time is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm really delighted to be here. Let me start sharing my screen. Let me also say, for those of you who are interested in getting the notes and other information later, I'll have something at the end where it'll show you the a place where you can download the resources for this talk. So yeah, as well as you can see my website listed here. So hopefully you'll be able to get more stuff when you go to the link at the end. Please respond in the chat. I'd like to know who's here. Are you a teacher? What are you teaching? Are you a teacher educator? If you're a researcher, I'm particularly interested because I'm going to be talking a bit about research on using technology. Administrators, students, great. Elementary teacher, thank you. It's always so nice when people participate in the chat. And I'm going to hope that because I'm going to ask you to participate in the chat more too throughout. I'm hoping to have some time for questions at the end, but do feel free to post in the chat. Some students, great, middle school, so excellent. Thank you so much for sharing where you're working, because having different perspectives and different needs is important to keep in mind when you're thinking about technology. So here's the basic agenda. I'm going to have a little prologue of what's effective and what's call. And then I'm really going to be organized by call typologies, which include beliefs about language learning and teaching, uses, and research. So there are 4 areas that I will be talking about: the structural or restricted, communicative or open, integrative or open, and integrated or normalized. Then a little bit on new technologies, and then some suggestions for you. All right, so when we ask about how do you tell what's useful, how do you tell what's effective? Well, we don't ask whether books are effective. We might talk about, well, are digital books effective? But we don't have book-assisted language learning. And because the reason that we don't do this is because we understand you have to use books appropriately. And with technology, very often we get so focused on the technology, we don't think about the fact that it's really how it's used. The tech itself may be good or bad, but the use of it is what counts. It has to fit the learners, the setting, the goals and objectives. And you'll hear me say this many times throughout this talk, that one size simply does not fit all. And then computer-assisted language learning is often what this area is called. And why do I and do we use this term call? Well, I mean, it started out with CAI, computer-assisted instruction, and it was just focused on the teacher. And then there was information and communication technologies, the focus on the technology, computer-mediated communication, talking about computers and communication. It was too focused, but computer-assisted language learning put the emphasis on learning. And this is where our attention is really focused, as it should be. We also occasionally see technology-enhanced language learning. This was an idea that became popular with devices like CD-ROMs and video discs, but CAL was so firmly entrenched by then that TEL didn't get very far. Now we see MAL, Mobile Assisted Language Learning. So they're always little acronyms. But for me, I mean, I use CAL to just mean any digital technology. It doesn't have to have a computer. As Levy and Hubbard did in their 2007 article, Why Call, 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 which was talk about what that, a very interesting title of that article. But it's because people just are accustomed to using it, and we use it to mean any kind of digital literacy, digital technologies. So we have these different call typologies. Mark Warschauer and I had an article in 1998, Computers and Language Learning, an overview that listed 3 types and phases of computing. Behavioristic from the 50s to the 70s, communicative from the 70s to the 90s, and then integrative from the 1990s till now. Well, in 2007, Mark Warschauer wrote The Death of Cyberspace and the Rebirth of Call, when he rephrased a little bit, calling it structural, which is a better term for it, and changing the dates a little bit. He was really concerned about when. Bax, on the other hand, in his call Past, Present, and Future in 2003, said that the types weren't at certain times. They're still with us. That restricted types were more drill-like and anything with a specific answer. Open types were open-ended. Simulations, word processors, basically everything that didn't have a specific answer to it is a way to think about it. And then he looked at integrated or normalized call as something that would be a future where we didn't notice the technology because it was so much a part of what we do. And I see that I've spelled normalized in the American way, not the way that he spells it, which is with an S, but you know what I mean. Something that is perfectly normal and we don't even notice. So let me start by talking about the first category. And I think of these as more like categories, the structural or Bax's restricted. It was behaviorist, audiolingual initially, still is a bit of that, prescriptive, there's a correct answer. And the role of the teacher is more as a monitor, where the computer is a tutor. So the computer is telling you things and you're trying to get the answer that the computer likes. So if we look at learners and uses, there were some differences between the United States and England in this period of time, especially initially, where the US was more interested in drills and the UK was more interested in simulations, though they also had drills, but, which moved it more into the second category. But the thing is, the early software had some pluses to it. They asked the learner's name, and brief feedback included the name. So you could get "good job, Marta," when you did well, or "try again, Mark," when you didn't do so well. So it was more personalized. The software also developed more feedback. So you didn't just get right or wrong, it told you more about it. So it became much more interesting over time. Obviously, classroom practice included and still includes practice drills, where you have to get better at what you're doing and you practice it. One of the things that we had with SuperMemo back many years ago and still have is this idea called spaced repetition. This is psychologically based, because if you sit and you study something for 30 minutes really hard, you don't necessarily learn it all that well. You're going to learn it better. You're going to memorize better if you study a little bit now and then again later this evening and then again in a few days. So spaced repetition in drills actually is a good thing about drills. And then, of course, there were games as drills. And I'm going to show you some images from this in a minute. Then I'm also going to talk a little bit about text manipulation, close or gap fill, and other types. Very easy to use on early computers and more interesting now. So in a moment, let me give you some examples. Probably nobody is old enough to recognize the thing on the far left. This is a Plato terminal, programmed logic for automated teaching operations. It was in the 60s to the 80s. The thing about Plato is that it was teacher programmed. It was networked, and it provided a very early form of communication among its users. This actually led to messaging, which we use now. Plato had a great research base because the people writing all of the content were mostly university faculty, and the data was stored on a mainframe. Sadly, all of that great data is not of much use to us now, and who would want to work with something that looks like that? Designware offered Grammar Examiner, where you were an editor of a newspaper and you had to find the errors, very textual. And then there was also Word Attack. This version of Word Attack you can buy from Amazon. It runs on Windows 95. I don't know that it runs on anything more recent, but definitely still there and much more interesting, more graphical. So drills became colorful when that became possible. The thing with these older ones is that they did personalize, and they started to have record keeping and some form of feedback with them. Newer things like Quizlet, quizzes, Kahoot, I mean, they are basically flashcards, the same sort of thing. They can be game-like, but it's the same basic idea that you need to practice, and there are different ways of practicing. Duolingo is a practice program that actually uses spaced repetition. With Quizlet, if you buy the $20 a year Quizlet, you can get spaced repetition, but the free version does not have it. So let's see, what kinds of drills do you guys use? What kinds of practice? Please post in the chat the things that you might use. Quizlet, Kahoot, Duolingo. What are the kinds of drills that you use? I see that Joy used to use Plato. Yes, it was very interesting. Okay, so Kahoot, Quizlet. We still use drills because they are still useful in some ways. And I'll talk in a minute about some of the research that we can look at with drills as well. So yeah, a couple of things out there. I cannot imagine anybody using Word Attack, but you might use something that has this kind of shoot them up, where you shoot down the words. There are a variety of things still out there that let you do that. Let me move on though to text manipulation. I don't know how that thing got on there. We have Gapmaster, the very old looking thing at the top right, and then we have Textivate at the bottom left. So Gapmaster was something that you could use on anything, I think including a Commodore 64, an Apple IIe. The thing with Gapmaster is that teachers created the text. It's similar to Textivate. Teachers create the text, and then the program will manipulate it. The really different thing that happened with Gapfill Online was that students didn't give up. If you're doing a close on paper and you're stuck, you're completely stuck. Nothing more to do. When you've got something that can give you a hint or give you one answer, way more interesting. And so it moved us forward in how to use things like close and that sort of text manipulation. With Textivate, it is a commercial program. It costs £30 a year for Textivate. But as you can see, it has many ways of doing text manipulation. It lets you jumble words, jumble sentences, jumble paragraphs. It lets you take out the vowels, take out the consonants, mix and match, so many different things. But with both of these, the positive is that you're using a teacher-created text, so that it's something that actually will fit your learners. So has anybody here used any kind of text reconstruction, Textivate? If you've ever used Breaking News English online, many of Sean Banville's exercises are text-to-8 ones, so something to think about. Yeah, I really hope you haven't used anything that looks like Gapmaster, but anyone for text-to-8? Okay, I'm going to move on then. And what I've got here is, let's look now at teachers and research with this type of activity. For the teacher, you could just say, go do, that exercise. But to be way more effective, you want people to work in pairs and groups. If you're doing it by yourself, it can get frustrating, but with a partner, it's more fun, it's more meaningful, and you keep doing it longer. If people are working individually, it's really not communicative. So doing it in pairs and groups makes it way more interesting. And then we see a lot of early quantitative research, a lot of early research on attitude. The problem with that kind of research was that people would talk about one kind of software in one setting and assume that it would work for everybody. That's just not the case. As we've gone on in time, we find we're getting better at saying, this is what works here with these people and now. But people are still very interested in attitude toward different things. And there's a lot of research that goes on about attitude. Students do like using things. And as you can see from our 3 youngsters here in the picture, they are totally intent on what they're looking at on their small screen, perhaps a game, but maybe Duolingo, maybe a drill, because they're working together. And that's a key thing that I'll be mentioning again and again as we move on. Okay, let's look at the next phase, the communicative, or Bax's open. It was communicative, cognitive language learning, open-ended. Teacher was the monitor and the facilitator. The computer was an extra. It wasn't the leader in this phase. Learners started using word processing, and it was very communicative. With word processing, students would write more and write longer. I'm going to talk and show you a little bit about concordancing, which is part of data-driven learning, and some simple simulations during this more communicative time. So I don't know how familiar you are with concordancing. A concordancer uses a very large basis of authentic text. And then you query, you post your word or your phrase in it, and it pulls out all of the examples of that word or phrase from this wide range of text. Many concordancers let you click on the word or phrase and it opens into the paragraph in which it's found. Some of them only show you the word or phrase. And some of them can also give you a very different sense of how it's used in different places. This is a look at Lex Tutor, and we're looking at how the language is used in academic circles, academic writing, and you can see on the right the different fields that interested in is used in. The idea behind this is that learners can see how language is actually used. And if they guess something that's not right, if they look up something that's not how it's used, they won't get very much. But something like interested in versus interested by, they're just going to get a whole lot of stuff back. So it's something that makes it useful for learners at the intermediate to advanced level. Beginners, not so much. Simulations, let me move on to, have been around a long time. I bet many of you have used simulations, maybe not the text-based kind that you see on the left, lemonade stand. Probably not quite the one on the right, a little more graphical, but it's still pretty basic. Oops, sorry, I just lost it. There we go. Okay, so with this type of technology, teachers need to prepare learners to use the tool. a lot of our learners can use word processing, but maybe they don't use it very well. They don't know how to use it in ways that take them less time, in ways that make it look better. So you need to prepare them to use it. With simulations, absolutely. You prepare learners to use the tools. You set tasks, especially if you want them to actually learn something and do something with the language, and you monitor their use. If the teacher doesn't set tasks, learners doing a simulation will probably not talk to each other at all or very little. So the task setting is really important. The research was that with word processing, we got longer and better writing. Maybe better retention when learners were trying to figure out, like using a concordance or data-driven learning. We definitely saw a lot more communication with simulations when they were encouraged to communicate with each other and some content. Initially, it was sort of like that first group. There were too many variables that were ignored, but now we're moving more into thinking about qualitative rather than quantitative research. And we're seeing a little more interesting stuff going on. Let me move on to the third area, which is something that's even more interesting. This integrative, and again, Bax is open, is really socio-cognitive, socio-cultural, content-based, a lot of media in this sort of category of technology. The teacher becomes a monitor and facilitator. And in many cases, the computer is a source of information, a source of input, and a source of discussion and communication. We had in 1998, we went from the text-based Gopher to Mosaic to Netscape, and we had the interactive web that started up. Of course, the problem with any new technology is that we often start using it in old ways we thought we'd given up. Call on the web started with drills, and really stupid drills. Check for right, X for wrong. No sense of why it was right or wrong. Just, oh, it's so cool. It's a drill on the computer. Students liked them, but they learned just as little with stupid drills on the internet as they did with stupid drills not on the internet. There were great possibilities, but initially there was not much intelligent use. And integrative approaches use technology in ways that could do so much more than just practice, so that you had email to communicate, the key pals, the digital pen pals, tandem learning, where you're learning with other groups. They teach you Spanish, you teach them English, or vice versa. And now our learners are blogging, doing their video logs, the vlogs, social media posts. So there are all sorts of ways that our learners are communicating that go beyond the classroom. Here's a question for you. Do any of you ask students to blog or write on social media? So do any of your learners do social media writing in English that you've asked them to do? Post in the chat if you ask your students to do this. I'm really curious to see what you ask them to do. Instagram may be very popular these days. Anybody? Pechakucha, okay, yeah. Authentic audience. In many cases, what we're getting for people are things like fan sites. You go, if you're playing something like Minecraft, or you've got a group that are interested in a topic, that's a good reason to go online and post into that kind of group. It's also something to think about, because our learners, by and large, unless they're young learners, they have mobile phones. They may not have a lot of data capacity, but they may or may not be able to post on Facebook or Instagram. And if that's what they're using to communicate, why not have them use it to communicate in English? Well, let me move on to the next sort of thing. We went from the text-based MUDs, multi-user dungeons, moves, into Second Life, a really virtual one. And I'll show you some pictures of this on the next screen. And also single and multi-user role-playing and strategic games. Things got way more interesting than just what we were doing before with simulations. So the top left is a picture from Schmooze University. If you are in the room, you could see who else was in the room. Well, you could query and get the names of who else was in the room. And then you could communicate with the other people in the room. It was all text-based. And you can still go to Schmooze University now if you have a Java-enabled browser. Since Java has largely gone away, you may never be able to try to play with Schmooze. It was a great opportunity for people to really practice writing because it was all in written form. You had to write to move, write to interact, write to do anything. The top right is a little screenshot from Second Life. This particular room may not be there anymore. It was Learn English from the British Council, but you were there with your avatar. You could do things while you were there. So it felt so much more real when we moved from something that was text-based to this virtual reality, a shared virtual space. And then, of course, you have a picture here from Trace Effects. Those of you who know me know that I have been involved with Trace Effects. I was one of the people involved in creating the game. It's what's called third-person actor, where you control the movement of Trace. He can move all over the place, and you control who he interacts with and what he says. So this is a kind of simulation that we have now, much more real looking. We've left behind the pure text, and we're into more interesting kinds of things. The other thing with Trace Effects is that it was designed for teachers to use, so that if you are a teacher and you're using Trace Effects, there's a lot of material that will help you with it. I always like to give a plug for Games for Good, Games for Change. Jane McGonigal, the game designer, talks about this, and she's created several of these games for change. A lot of these games are there that raise awareness of social issues and promote positive social change. These really are content-heavy games. So the things that you're doing with them is you are learning from the game itself, and then you can expand from there into project-based learning. What you see on the top right is My Life as a Refugee, sponsored by the UN High Commission on Refugees, giving people a sense of what it is to be a refugee. The one in the middle is about living on the street, not having a lot of money, not necessarily living on the street, but it helps people understand the situation that people have when they don't have money. It's this question of, can you survive without much money? And the bottom left is Way. It's about two strangers who have to try to communicate when they don't share a language. So it's all interesting. There are interesting ways to begin a discussion, to have a discussion, to begin a discussion, and to begin a larger project with this type of game for change. So has anyone used simulations? Oh, actually, Second Life is still there. You can still be on Second Life. I was in a conference not too long ago that was held in Second Life. So it's still there, still going on, and you can use Second Life. So if you've used simulations, please share what you've used in the chat. What kind of simulations have you used? Have you used any? So a simulation is a great initial Simutrans, a really good way to start with role plays, to have people see what it looks like as you get more advanced. There are, of course, simpler language simulations and more advanced language simulations. So you have a lot of different options with simulations. Yeah, role play, very good. You can do role play in the classroom. You can do role play without any technology. You can certainly create different kinds of role plays that use technology to assist. Minecraft, very important one, you know, another kind of thing that you could use. A lot of people use Minecraft. So different kinds of things that you can use for, actually, you know, and the things that I like best are ones that you can expand on and do so much more with than just learn. So let's look at teachers and research. With this category of technology, there were way more choices, way more things that you could do, a lot more differentiation with media, so that you could do things that had audio and text or video and text. They were much more interesting in terms of differentiation. And it's continued to be that way. A lot of what we do now is just a lot more interesting. And teachers also facilitate the use, again, thinking about how to make what you're using work for your learners in your setting. When we look at the research and a lot of the different considerations, Mark Warschauer's technology research started with email as a tool that let us do more and interact with others. So current research includes a lot more sociocultural considerations. Who's using it, with whom? And this is especially true when the communication is with people outside the classroom, as well as people inside, people outside the country, as well as inside. And it shows, once again, the research once again shows that there's a lot of learning that goes on inside the activity. And depending on how the teacher structures it, a lot of learning that can follow on outside the activity. I mean, I think this is a really important thing to think about, that don't just think of the tech you use as I'm just going to do this and that's all we're going to do. Think about how you can leverage the technology to do a whole lot more stuff. The research now is really qualitative. There are a few people still doing quantitative stuff, but it doesn't make much sense, because what you want to see is how it's used. How do people in this area at this proficiency level use this technology to do this task? So it's much more qualitative than quantitative in how it works. Let me go into a little bit with new technologies. We got a lot of initials: AR, VR, AI, you know, all of these are relatively new technologies, and we're seeing a lot of talk about it. So with a lot of the stuff that we're hearing is that it's new and wonderful, and this is the best thing ever. I mean, augmented reality, AR, is like Pokemon Go. I mean, if you're doing Pokemon Go, the picture on the right is my buddy in my living room. So it's something where you can look at the world and you have another layer on the world. Google Glass is on the bottom left, and it's a similar kind of technology that lets you put a layer on what you see with what's stored, what's being delivered to you by the computer or by the technology that you're using. You might have used something like this if you were exploring a museum. Some cities have little apps that let you do this kind of thing when you're looking at stuff within the city. The augmented reality doesn't necessarily require a headset to let you explore and shields you from the world. Now, virtual reality ranges from a shared online space like Second Life to a self-contained virtual world experience with a headset that eliminates the real world. I have to say, when I look at the picture of this child with a headset, I'm horrified. Children should not be interacting with the world solely with a device. They should be interacting with the real world. But, but we'll see what happens with it. Both AR and VR are developing to allow sharing, which would make it communicative. But when we think about what their impact is, we do still have a question. They're both very intrusive on privacy. I mean, Pokemon Go, for example, knows where you are and where you go when you have the app on. You don't need to be using the app for it to be tracking you. And this is true of basically all of these things. A lot of them are internet enabled and they know where you are. So I get a little worried about our virtual realities, though there are elements of it that could be wonderful for us as teachers. The ability to have people say, look at something and get some help pop up for them. That's very cool. I mean, very, very real possibilities, but there's a lot of questions about it. And when I think also about AI, artificial intelligence, it is the most hyped thing out there, I swear, that AI will correct your essays. It'll fix your pronunciation. I mean, why should teachers learn the weaknesses of their students when AI will just tell them? Now, if you've got 80 students in a class, getting some help correcting essays is a wonderful thing. Having AI creating poems and playing with it and having your learners see if their poems look like the AI's poems, I mean, that definitely has some possibilities. But, for me, when I read learner essays, when I listen to their speech, their presentations, I learn about them as people. I don't just learn about their language use. I learn about who they are. And to me, much as I absolutely hate grading essays, I like learning about my students. And so with the AI taking the drudgery out of teaching, I think the people who say that don't understand teaching, that assessment is really part of teaching. And if we as teachers don't do any assessment, we aren't learning where our learners are and where we need to go. So I've got a few real questions about that. This is a quote that I found online from Bernard Marr, who writes about AI. As AI gets more sophisticated, it might be possible for a machine to read the expression that passes on a student's face that indicates they are struggling to grasp a subject and will modify a lesson to respond to that. I don't know about you, but to me, the idea that AI is going to read my expression and respond to it, it's sort of creepy. I mean, it's also, when you think about AI, it's the algorithms that are created by people. They are probably not created by teachers. And someone looking at the expression on my face might read that I'm struggling to grasp it. A similar expression on maybe an Indonesian student's face or a Chinese student's face or a South American student's face might mean something different. And the AI is going to decide for you. If it's correcting language, whose language is it using as its basis for correction? So this is something that I would urge you to think about. It's got potential. And like I said, if you've got 80 students in a class, getting some help with reading essays is great, but it's not the best thing ever necessarily. When we think about teachers and research with these three things, with AR, VR, and AI, the teachers are barely in control. There might be some options for teachers to have something to do with what's happening with the AR and VR, but mostly developers are in charge of content. Once again, we've moved from having teachers make decisions about what's happening in their classes, in the learning going on, and now it's people who aren't involved in education, by and large, the developers, who are in charge of content. The research is so new because the technology is constantly changing. And one thing we do know is that there are a whole lot of privacy issues. These are marketed as solutions. I don't think so. They should be marketed as, oh, here's this neat thing that you might want to play with, but it's not really gonna solve stuff. So I think that it's something to keep in mind when you hear AR or VR or AI. They're things to think about and maybe use, and maybe not. Let's go on to this last piece about integrated or normalized call, where Bax was saying that we don't notice the technology because it is so integrated in what we're doing. It's just part of everyday life. And so the question, of course, becomes, are we there yet? We have widespread acceptance of some technologies. Word processing, I mean, unless you're teaching very young learners, maybe pre-literate, you're using a word processor. Mobile phones are all over the place. They might not be allowed in the classroom, but they are a technology that we use for all sorts of stuff these days. So these are a couple of areas where we just sort of assume that we can do it. If we want to find something out, we pull up the Google, and if we want to learn how to do something, we go to YouTube, because YouTube videos are about absolutely everything that you could possibly want to learn. So in 2011, Bax wrote Normalization Revisited, where he looked at the idea and said, nah, we aren't there. How do we get there? And one of the things that he felt teachers needed to do was start with a needs audit. See what needs your students have in order to get to their learning objectives. See what needs you have as the teacher. See where technology will meet real needs. Don't use technology if it isn't doing anything helpful. He also suggested to have a learning plan for how you're going to integrate the technology, and taking this sociocultural or Vygotskian view that you're learning in a community, you're not learning by yourself. And sometimes the technology can be your helpful partner, but sometimes it's other people. So we aren't at normalization yet, I would agree, but it's something that we can think about. Now to my last segment of my talk, some suggestions for you as you're thinking about how to use technology, what technology to use, with whom, for what purpose. In 1998, Norm Johnson and I wrote something called A Place to Start in Selecting Software. And so this was something that Bax also mentioned in 2011. So I was pleased to hear that he agreed with Norm and me. But while the specific technologies that we recommended in 1998 are way out of date, the questions are still really good. And these are questions you really should start with. Who are your users? What are their goals? What are your learning objectives? What's the setting? Are you working in a technology-rich environment or very little? How much do teachers and learners know already about the technology that you want to use? And what do you have now? Do you have help? Do you have the kind of equipment that you need to do what you want to do? Do you have the money that you need if you need to buy stuff? And so importantly, do you have the time? Do you have the time to learn something new, to get good at something new or good enough that you can see how it will suit your learners, how it will increase their ability to achieve their learning objectives. Because if you don't have time to use something, to learn something new before you use it, maybe don't use it. It's not a good idea to use something badly. Now, let me remind you that you can find all of this stuff on the resource list, and you'll see a link to the resource list on my last slide, which is coming up soon. This is from Chapelle in 2001, and a lot of people who do research still use these criteria for evaluating technology. And the language learning potential, can you use it beneficially? Learner fit, of course, does it work with your learners? The meaning focus, it doesn't have to be completely meaning focused, but how does it focus on meaning in what it's doing? Authenticity, in the sense of, is what they're doing with this technology in their activities in class, is this something they're going to use outside of class? If it's only something that they're using in class, maybe not as useful as something that they can also use outside. And then, of course, the positive impact, is it going to make people happier? Are they going to like using it? And then, of course, practicality. Do you have the resources? Again, do you have the help if you need it? Do you have the time to learn it? Do you have the money if you need to buy something? So practicality is a really good thing to think about as well. I'm going to show you another thing from Phil Hubbard in 2019, talking about things that are true, some observations about technology. And as he says, these really haven't changed much since the beginning. They are still true, and basically as true in 2021 as they were in 1984. The first one is that there's an adoption cycle. You always get this, oh, this is the best thing ever. Oh, you got to try this. Oh, this will help teachers reduce drudgery in teaching. I don't know how many times I've heard help teachers reduce drudgery in teaching. And it doesn't, or it doesn't necessarily work quite the way you think it will. And so you might want to wait a little bit to decide if something really is the best new thing ever. See what other people are doing with it. See how it's actually being used. Also, very importantly, technology mediates. Technology doesn't teach. You know, you aren't going to learn directly from something most of the time. You're going to use technology to help you achieve a learning goal. If there's something you want to learn, technology may be your tool to help you get there. Research, very important, but don't look at the first piece of research and say, oh, that's true for, that's got to be true for everybody. Look at who the research is with, what it's using. Is the setting like you? Are the students like yours? Is what they do in the classroom like what you do? If it is, great. If it isn't, maybe it'll work, maybe not. What we've been saying all along is that teachers need both technological and pedagogical training, because you need to be ready to use the technology in pedagogically appropriate ways, not just using the tech, but knowing how to use it to help learners achieve their learning goals. We also have to be ready for constant change. Technology does not sit still. It's constantly changing. For example, I updated my Zoom just before I came online because Zoom is newer. I don't know what it's going to do that's different, but technology changes all the time. So we have to be ready. It's not going to stop just because we've learned how to do something a certain way. And then, of course, learners need training to understand how to learn with technology. They may be great at posting to Instagram or doing all sorts of things, but they may not really understand how they can use this to learn And it's part of our job as teachers to help them understand how to learn with the technology that we're using. This is what you need to do, okay, to see what really works. We all need to engage in classroom-based or action research. We need it because every situation is a little different from every other situation. But by seeing the range of uses in the range of places, we really learn more. It also helps us as teachers do a better job. You know, you start with your question or issue, you think about what might work, you plan what you're going to do, and you talk with other people. This is not a solo activity. You implement the change, you observe what happens, taking notes, and then you reflect on it. You discuss with others. How did it work? You could do this with journaling as well to think about, did it work? Then you're going to repeat or test it to refine it, to see if it's going to work better. Again, observe and take notes. And then finally, you're going to reflect, discuss, and share what you found out. Obviously, you can do many more cycles of this research, but it's something that will let you really move the field forward by sharing what you've tried and what you've learned. So I have one more comment for you. When you think about what you're going to choose, you cannot do everything. There will always be more new apps than time to look at them. There will always be something new, some new, great new thing coming up. So pick a couple of areas based on your learners and the learning goals and objectives. Focus on those. Talk to other people. You can look at TESOL's call interest section, IATEFL's learning technologies SIG. Talk to your colleagues, talk to other people, get some ideas about what works in similar settings with similar learners. And remember, it's not the tool that matters. It's the use. It's how well we work with what we've got. You know, try a variety of things, but always be thinking about, does it meet your learning objectives, and is my use of this tool going to move us in the right direction? So that's it for now. For me, that was a quick view of a variety of technologies, a variety of research. This is where you'll find the resource list on tinyurl.com. Let me put my email and this stuff into the chat so you can see that. The QR code will let you, oops, let me copy this and paste it. So the QR code lets you get to the resource list if you want, and then I've pasted into the chat my email, my website, and the resource list. So we have a few minutes for questions.
We have 3 minutes for questions. Well, thanks so much, Deb. That's very interesting. It's like, for me, it's like walking down the memory lane. And I think that's for Joy Egbert as well, because we were talking about Second Life in 2007 and stuff. So we're very old, obviously. But yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that I took from your presentation is pretty much like there are all things around in call that are very much relevant to these days. It's not about the tools. It's, as you say, it's about the use, and we need to always understand our learners and our goals in order to select the appropriate technology, which is very important for teacher, I think, because many times, again, we are charmed by the technology because they're like new technologies are coming.
Yeah, it's the shiny new toy idea, you know. Teacher enthusiasm is a good thing. I mean, being enthusiastic about a new thing is good, but make sure that you're enthusiastic about the right new thing and using it in the right way.
All righty. So probably we can ask for one question if anybody has a question to be asked to Deb, or everybody is now busy reflecting their use of technology.
Hopefully you'll will take a look at the resource list. I've put in the chat the link to the resource list because it's got a whole lot of stuff that you can look at. The things that I mentioned and a few more things too. And do feel free to email me if you have questions or visit my website and see a lot more stuff.
So yay, they will be crawling all over your website, Deb, because they're very useful, lots of things there. But unfortunately, is there anybody really, nobody who would like to ask a question? I think we have 2 minutes. Otherwise, Pak Toar is going to kill me if I exceeding the time. No questions? Well, then, as Deb has said, you can always send her an email and check the website and the resource list that are provided in the chat box now. So before we close it, if you can copy and paste those information really quickly, and then later on use it for your reference. So thank you so much again, Deb, and thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us the old but useful tips and reflection for all of us as teachers. And we hope that you stay healthy and happy, and probably it's dinner time now.
Yes, well, you know, I ate before I started so that it would be, so I could stay on and listen to Joy.
Oh yeah, oh yes, Joy is coming next. So everybody, I hope you're still as excited as I am now, because we're going to go to the next session with Prof. Joy Egbert, somebody who is very prominent in call area. I mean, you will listen to Deb's and Joy's names every time, all the time, along with Chapelle and Bucks, because it's like always repeating in calls. So we're going to go to the next session. So stay tuned. Probably it's time for you to grab a refill to your coffee. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, everyone. A cup of coffee or tea, and then we'll be back in 9:31. So at the time, I'll return the time to you. Thank you.